Marc Spears, who I think is just fantastic, and obviously he writes for The Undefeated now, but has been a long-time NBA guy. He wrote yesterday, and he talked, and I'm going to just read a portion of his article that I thought was very, very persuasive. He said, there are many ways for players to get their message across. If they return to play, they could demand that a public service announcement about racial injustice and or police brutality airs during the first and second halves of all games on TV and radio. The loop of advertising running at center court during games could also offer a message against racial injustice. Since the games are played at a neutral venue, they could suggest the NBA name the floor in memory of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Rashad Brooks or Ahmaud Arbery. They can ask that Black Lives Matter or I Can't Breathe be put in bold letters on the baseline. NBA 2K, meanwhile, could be leveraged to feature this court on the video game that millions of kids play worldwide. For the first time, the majority of NBA media around the world are also willing and eager to hear athletes talk about racial injustice and police brutality. Journalists who were previously nervous, scared, or turned a blind eye are anxiously awaiting their words on these topics. NBA players can keep the conversation going whenever they have a mic placed in front of them, and there will be more eyes and ears on the NBA. With so many people yearning for live sports, NBA players have the power to use the media to their advantage. And I thought, this was a guy, like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, what do we do? How do we do it? And I mean, he rattled off like 6 amazing ideas, including, one of them that obviously spoke to me is, I have a 10-year-old son. I promise you, and he's going to watch all the NBA games when it comes back because he yearns for it. But I promise you this, he wouldn't miss anything on 2K. You know what I mean? And something like that, like thinking a little bit, they wield a tremendous amount of power in terms of, and you do lose that power in some sense if you sit out. Now, again, guy, I will be the first to say.
You do. I mean, look at Kaepernick, just for example. I mean, his voice was loud and clear while he was in the NFL. And him not being in the NFL now for obviously, like, there's essentially being banished. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But just the simple fact about him not being in the NFL now, his voice isn't nearly as loud. I mean, the stage that is provided from sports is something that, like you mentioned, that article from Spears, like I had a screenshot from that same article that I wanted to reference, and it was right towards the end. Just to piggyback off what you just said, Spears wrote, "What if Jesse Owens didn't compete to win 4 gold medals during the 1936 Berlin Games and in the process crush Adolf Hitler's myth of Aryan supremacy? What if Tommy Smith and John Carlos didn't race during the 1968 Mexico Games or hold a black fist in the air? What if Colin Kaepernick never kneeled during an NFL game in an effort to bring awareness to police brutality? What if NBA players declined to use their largest platform while playing for 3 months to voice their message against racial injustice and police brutality?"
To that point, Kev, guess who was on that call yesterday that they put together it was less than Friday, but they had another call yesterday of about 40 guys. John Carlos was on the call.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, he was on the call yesterday with the other NBA players. So it'd be fascinating to know what he told everybody, because he is obviously. But look, I there is no question that is a very profound point. To this day, you and I the names of Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and you know what they did when they were given the opportunity, when they had center stage. When they had center stage, the biggest stage in the world, literally, the Olympics, and what they did, and still to this day, it's 2020. And you mentioned those names, and people know, even kids know who those guys were. And
and even if you don't know the name, you know the photo, and you know at least the intent and the meaning behind it.
Well, and look, and these things, it's a little bit different now than. Well, honestly, it's different now than it's ever been, especially with sports. Sports do create, and Lord knows we have learned over the course of the past 3 months, sports create a time capsule of what was going on in many cases. And how many old games have we watched? How many things have we seen? And so you think about forever the story of the 2020 season. They have the ability to get that message out there, not only now, but for forever. It's kind of like how I think about, like, I remember once upon a time hearing why, you would hear about, like, say, somebody like Phil Mickelson, and he would make this crazy amount of money for endorsements, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, what in the world? Like, why do these guys make so much money? And one agent I remember telling me, saying, because, like, say he wears like a KMPC or whatever visor he wears, right? So these people, they're not just when they're lending, when they're thinking about the fact that they are sponsoring this. Every picture, every video, everything that takes place from this good player, like in perpetuity, he will be wearing that, right? So every time you go back and you watch a video of him winning the Masters, or every time you see an old picture that runs in a newspaper that they're using, like, that's the idea. And I think about that in terms of the NBA and this 2020 season, in terms of the advertising, in terms of what could be on the court, in terms of all the other things, that could have a magnificent impact that forever, when people are looking back as the chronicle of the 2020 season, it will always be right there for everybody to see. And that's part of the reason I think you and I both, we didn't even talk about the Marc Spears article before we started recording this. It was
we didn't.
But it was, there were so many great ideas there that made me think, wow. I mean, this message, more people would see that than you could ever get to see that, especially when you're counting on the news coverage of whatever you're doing. Now, somebody walking away from the money, somebody walking away from their career as a basketball player to go become an activist, by all means, it's a noble cause. Yeah. And if that's what you want to do with your life, but there are a lot of guys in that league that would be at great risk of having a career even, and the amount of money they would have going forward. And I think of it as someone who supports a family. There's a lot of guys that got to support a family.
Sure.
And a lot of other people in their lives that end up really counting on them, right? And so I think in the end, it's a good discussion to have. I'd still believe they will play. And Kyrie Irving could put, as Marc mentioned, Kyrie Irving, there's 8 teams not playing. You could rally a big group of guys that aren't going to be involved in Orlando to help out with all the social change and all the platforms that you want to reach.